Well, it's great to have Coach Greg Tonagel back on Sports Spectrum. Hi, Coach.
Good to be here.
It's been, at least 5 years, 5+ years, I think.
Has it
since you
really
were
been
last
that
on the
long?
show. Well, here's the funny thing. I was talking to my daughter as I'm on campus at Indiana Wesleyan, and it was almost 5 years to the day that I first walked on this campus myself and spoke at chapel and got to meet you and watch you got coach a couple of games. And that really started this connection, this, I think, marriage in many ways of my life and the Romano family with Indiana Wesleyan. So it's good to talk to you.
I'm so glad you came on campus 5 years ago. It's been an awesome friendship.
Yeah, I'm grateful for our friendship too. I love that we're talking when we're talking, and I'm glad that we're doing it in person. Those are always the best podcasts. But you recently, earlier this season, it was really the second game of the year, got to your 500th career win. And first of all, congratulations. I think it's an amazing accomplishment. Were you even aware, like prior to people making you aware that this was coming up? Like at the end of last year, did you realize you were at 499 and wanted that one more win? Is that even something you were paying attention to?
No, I've said this over and I mean it. I'm just not a numbers guy.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware until, they started making graphics and telling me, and it really should have happened last year. We struggled down the stretch to put some wins together. We had some tough injuries and we weren't playing our best basketball, but it was the last thing on my mind at the time because I was trying to get our team back on track. And even going into this year, you get so caught up into like the day-to-day coaching and trying to get your team to reach its potential. I mean, the last thing you're thinking about is some number that ultimately doesn't mean much. There's stories and people behind these numbers that mean a lot, and that's ultimately what we've all been reflecting upon, and that gives meaning to coaching.
I also read that your fourth all-time, I don't even know if this stat is accurate, but it was on social media, so it's got to be, right? But it said your fourth all-time and fewest number of games to reach 500. The first was Adolph Rupp, the second was Mark Few, the third was Roy Williams, and the fourth is Greg Tonagel. Is that kind of mind-blowing to think about? Like, I know, people can exaggerate numbers or whatever, but your name is with three of the all-time great coaches in basketball history.
Well, one, I've learned you can do anything you want with numbers to impress people, right? So somebody could find a way to make it look impressive. But two, wouldn't you pay to see all the people's reactions when they go, oh, yeah, Adolph Ruff and Mark Few and Greg Tonagel. Who's that?
Who's that guy?
That's going to be the common phrase. Who's that guy? And I'm fine with it because I don't have social media. I don't have all those things. I like living in obscurity and just being with my family. So as long as they're not knocking on my door, calling me, or online trolling me, I'm totally fine with that.
You may have told this story 5 years ago, but tell the story of how Indiana Wesleyan even came into the picture of Greg Tonagel, because you were a Valpo guy, right? You went to Valpo. You were part of Homer Drew's basketball program and played with Bryce in the late 90s, and somehow Indiana Wesleyan comes into the picture. Tell that story. Yeah,
so I'm at Valparaiso. It actually kind of starts a little bit earlier. I went through 5 knee surgeries, so I end up as a 6-year player for Valparaiso. Oof. In fact, there was a story going into my 6th year into the NCAA tournament where I got compared to Methuselah. It was like players you don't know about in the NCAA tournament, and then everybody's got these great words and accolades, and then it gets to me and it says, well, he's kind of like Methuselah. He's been around for 700 years.
Yeah, he's like 27.
Yeah, nothing good about my game or anything, but I was playing for, I played for Homer. Homer retires. Scott Drew takes over. I played for Scott for my 5th year. Scott takes the Baylor job, and I think I'm done because my body just can't take it anymore. And Homer says, hey, why don't you come back for another year? I'm taking over. And I'm like, man, Coach, you've seen me play. It's not very pretty anymore. And he's like, well, why don't you coach? So he convinces me to come back for my 6th year. And that was kind of the start of me getting into coaching because I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I jump on there and I begin to love coaching and the ministry side of things. And the next year, I've got a brother at Indiana Wesleyan, and I'd never visited before. And he calls me, and towards the beginning of their season, he says, hey, rumor has it we might be losing our coach. You should apply. And I say, hey, they're not hiring me. I'm a graduate assistant right now, no experience. He said, I'm just telling you. So I actually come down to Indiana Wesleyan for the first time, and I come to a game, and I happen to bump into the AD, and I just tell him, hey, if you ever know of any openings in the Christian college world, I'd love to know, and maybe you could teach me a few things about this and connect me. And lo and behold, it was 4 months later, the job opened up. And even then I said, well, if I could just get an interview, good experience, like you got to start building, interview experience. Well, whittled down to I was a finalist, and Homer Drew talked him into giving me an opportunity and an interview, and I got hired and got to coach my brother for 2 years, and I had another brother that joined us, so it was a family affair for those first few years.
Wow. And you were the head coach right away, and you've been the head coach now for many years. How many years is this?
19.
19 years.
I was 24 when they hired me, and I turned 25 a few days later.
Yeah.
And I say this, and I mean it. One, I wouldn't have hired myself, and they shouldn't have hired me at that time, but I'm so thankful for the opportunity. I mean, I was as green as you could get at that time.
Yeah. Who are some of the people that helped you early on that you can think about? Because at 20, even 26, 27, 2 years in, 3 years in, you're still so young. Who are the guys? I mean, everybody has a guy at least that they surround themselves with that really helps you along and kind of guides you as a coach.
Well, mine was Jeff Clark. So Jeff Clark's my assistant, associate head coach, been with me for 18 years. We both were young, and we both were feeling this out, but Jeff really kind of helped guide my heart during those times. I mean, I say this a lot, coaching is an amazing profession, but it's also a dangerous one. We're given so much power as coaches. We're given an opportunity to be very intense relationally, and we have leverage. Our guys want to please us. They'll do anything we tell them to do because in some ways we hold the thing that they want, playing time, success, career. So I think I, along the way early on, I wasn't ready to handle all that. And at times my heart wasn't in the right place, but I had people like Jeff who was on this journey with me, and we would pray together, and he would challenge me. And ultimately he really helped steer me in the right way. And, just put my heart in the right place. Cause there was a lot of pressure. I think that's part of the reason coaching's so hard, right? There's pressure to win, but at the same time, excuse me, we're trying to do this correct relationally. And so you need people like that who can hold you accountable, but also encourage you at the same time. And Jeff was that for me.
I think it's very unique when I'm talking to you and thinking about your journey and hearing Jeff as the guy who's been on this journey with you, and you and him have done this for so many years together. I'm sure, maybe I'm wrong on this, you can confirm this or deny it, but I'm sure Jeff has had opportunities to be head coach, a head coach somewhere, and he's not. He's still with you. I'm sure you've had opportunities to go elsewhere, and maybe even people would say, Greg Tonagel, why don't you just go to the high D1 level and have an opportunity to coach a Power 5 school or whatever it might be, or a big school, big time school, and yet you've chosen to stay at Indiana Wesleyan. Why is this place a place that you, and you can speak for Jeff if you'd like, but for you to stay here and invest in what's going on in this place?
I think at the end of the day, just the simplest way for me to answer that is just, I was reading in Ephesians this week, and Paul talks about he only wants to boast in the cross because he's died to the world and the world has died to him. And when you don't filter your decisions through the world, you're just more clearly able to hear what God wants from you. And I really feel like I've heard and I'm following God's very clear purpose for my life. And that doesn't mean it's always easy. It doesn't mean that there's some desires in me for worldly recognition or, you could go make a lot of more money elsewhere. But at the end of the day, I just think people want purpose. And the more men I talk to, especially my age and in coaching, they're looking for that purpose. And oftentimes we're looking in the wrong places. And God has kept us here and given us incredible purpose. And to me, that's why I think I have one of the most fulfilling jobs anywhere, because we've nailed that purpose.
Yeah, it's a beautiful purpose. I'm talking to Greg Tonagel here on Sports Spectrum from Indiana Wesleyan. This is interesting how I'm going to ask this. So we're coming off of a game that I watched you guys play really well last night, and you won by a very large margin. And I'm watching you coach because I knew we were going to do this interview, and I've watched you coach before, but I was probably watching you even more than I was watching the game in some ways, because I just wanted to kind of see if there would be something that would spark a question in our conversation. So here's the question. How do you talk, and I put air quotes around the word talk, with an official when he might miss a call, which I felt like from a fan's perspective, maybe there was one or two last night, and I say this jokingly, and still retain your salvation? In other words, how do you stay intense? How do you make sure that you're coaching and go to bat for your players if there's a call missed, and yet still maintain that idea of being an ambassador for Christ?
Let me just first confess that I have screwed this up plenty of times. And it's honestly been an area of conviction. Because one time a mentor of mine asked me after a game, he just said, what other adult relationship do you have where you talk to somebody that way? And I thought,
wow,
none. Like I wouldn't yell at anybody, any adult. I didn't even talk to my kids like that. But you watch coaches, get so animated with officials. And I think sometimes we forget they're humans and they're people too. And so, last night there was a questionable block charge call, and I got animated. But that referee and I would consider him a friend. We've had a good relationship, and
sure,
I've learned to move on. Let them know what you think, because I think that's appropriate. But then to move on and realize they're human too. But that is a tricky part of our game as coaches. I mean, it really is.
Well, you want to have an intensity, and you care obviously about winning, and you want your team to play well. And I've talked to many coaches, not all of them are Christians at Christian schools, but they are believers who will just let that go sometimes and then apologize later. Are you even thinking about that in the moment? Like, does your mind go to Christ at all in the midst of a game and say, okay, Lord, I didn't represent you well there, or okay, God, help me represent you well in the midst of this really close game? Like the first game of the year you guys played came down to the wire. You didn't win. It was, I think, a 2-point loss. So are you thinking about, the mindset of Christ in the midst of coaching a game?
I am now. I mean, I'm learning to be Spirit-led. I mean, I think sometimes we think like all that talk about being Spirit-led is when we're in church, when we're worshiping, but I think God wants us to be Spirit-led in the things we love the most and the things that matter the most. So one of the questions I'm asking during coaching is Lord, what am I missing? James 1 says if anyone lacks wisdom, he should ask God. And I think that can apply to basketball. That doesn't mean God's always giving me the right play, but there has been moments where I feel like he has. Or I'll say, God, I don't know who needs to be in the game right now, but I've surrendered my team to you, and I'll look down the bench, and sometimes it is clear, put this guy in. I just think we should be asking those questions, because what that's saying is, Lord, I don't have the answers, but you do. And I just want to be that type of leader. Same thing at home, right? I don't know how to lead my kids right now, but you do. Like, show me what I don't know. And I think God's more than willing to show us.
How are you at handling a loss?
Horrible.
Yeah.
And all you got...
Because I'm so glad that they won last night. As we're talking, I'm like, all right, they won by a large margin, and it's going to be a fun conversation. But I was thinking, man, if they lose, how is Coach going to be? And I knew that we would still have a good conversation. But I think that's a really fascinating way to look at being a believer and a coach, in a way that you are with Indiana Wesleyan. So how are you as a handling a loss coach?
Well, they often say your greatest strengths can be your greatest weakness. So my strength is a competitive nature, and I just can't accept anything but absolute, best. But in coaching, losing comes, and the conversation usually I go home, walk in, tell my wife, I got to find a new job. I don't know what I'm doing. It's time to find something new. And she talks me off the ledge, and then you go put the kids down, and they have no clue what happened. They're, hey, Dad, tell me a story. Hey, Dad, this, and that's good in a way that it redirects. But honestly, it's the losing that really drives you at times. Some of my apathetic times, or times that I've wondered after season what's next, is when we've won national championships. But then it's been times where we've lost and come off a disappointing season, and I've been motivated. I was motivated this offseason. I didn't think I did a great job last year. My team didn't perform. So I really grew this offseason. I focused in, I studied some things, and I felt like I came more equipped for this year.
You said, quote, I don't coach college basketball, I coach people. Unpack that a little bit, because I think people would say, wait, you're a coach. Of course you coach college basketball.
It's a little bit of the performance paradox. I think the more focus and emphasis we put on winning, the less effective we become. And some people would call this, the process-oriented leader, but it's more than that to me. I think at the end of the day, it's not behaviors or skills that drive people. It's the heart and the mind. I mean, just look at Jesus. He constantly redirected people back to the heart. If somebody had an issue, it was what was behind the issue. What's the heart? What's the sin? What's the mindset? And as I've grown in a leader, I feel like God's constantly asking me to focus in on two things and ask two simple questions. How do I unify hearts, and how do I create fearless minds? And it's really the bedrock of our program. That's I am third. So how do I unify people around a bigger vision than themselves? Like, we live in a society where we're turned inward, right? Everything's about me. Everything's about my needs, and I'm self-focused. So my job as a leader is how do I unify people around something bigger than that? But then the other picture is fear in our society is a great motivator for so many people. Well, that's only going to get you so far, right? Fear to me is the great paralyzer. So how do I take fear out of the game? And I'm constantly paying attention to those two people as it relates to basketball players. So for instance, let's say you're in a shooting slump. I could just take you in the gym and try to get 1,000 shots up.
Yeah.
But let's say you're in a shooting slump because you're fearful, you're afraid of, never being good enough, or you're really driven by comparison right now. Shooting 1,000 shots isn't going to change that. But if I can help you understand your God-given identity, who God says you are as a son, and your actual position right now in eternity, like you actually sit at the right hand of the Father in Christ, and you begin to understand that, I think you're going to release the ball a little bit differently. Now, some people say, oh, that's kind of crazy. That's super religious. And I'm just, well, that's reality for me as a believer. So my job then is to pay attention to both things. Now you have to go work hard. But I think if I can get your mind and your heart right, then you start to work hard. That's a deadly combination.
How have you been able to do that with personalities that are different, with players that come from different backgrounds, with players that come from, maybe one comes from a two-family home, maybe somebody has a broken home, and maybe somebody that didn't have a lot of faith growing up. How do you kind of insert yourself in many ways, not just as a coach, but as a pastor or shepherd to these kids that all come from different realms?
I think it starts with prayer, and I'll tell you a story. Years ago, we had a player, a Division I transfer, who was struggling and not reaching his potential, and I found myself going to God, praying but complaining. God, change this person. This is what I don't like about him. This is what needs to be changed. And one day I called our staff into the locker room, and I said, hey, we're just going to go from locker to locker, and we're going to pray for this team. Like, we need a breakthrough. Like, what we were doing wasn't working. And as I was praying, I felt the Lord tell me, stop telling me who you want this kid to be, but rather just ask me who this kid is. And I challenged the staff with the same prayer, and I remember it's crystal clear. We got done praying, and I came back and I said, everybody take a marker and write on the board what the Lord spoke to you about this player. And we all had the same thing. There was 4 of us in the room.
Wow. And
the Lord gave us the same word for this kid. And it reminded me that my job isn't to tell God who these players are. Like, he's already created them. He's destined them for this moment. My job is to discover that. And so sometimes prayer is just saying, God, would you open my eyes to who you want this kid to be? And every kid's going to be different, because as you said, some of them come to us, they don't have a 2-parent home. Some of them come to us and everything's been given to them their whole life. Some of them come to us just broken in sin. And so just asking God how we as coaches can join that work is a much quicker way to get to them than forcing my, expectations on them. And I guess what I'm saying is it's also, once again, aligning my coaching with what God is doing in their lives.
Talk us through, as a coach, when you're working with a player who may not see a lot of playing time, maybe not see any playing time. And last night was a unique game because it was a large enough margin for you guys in the victory that you got some of your guys that may not normally get in, they got a chance to play. And but I was also watching some of those guys throughout the game, and they were into the game, like cheering. They were maybe the best teammates you could want. How do you manage the personalities? Because I'm sure those guys want to play too. Like, I think everybody wants to play if you're a competitor, and as a coach that that's just not always the case. How do you kind of, especially now that you're in 19 years of doing this, how have you managed those different roles for the different people?
It's becoming increasingly more difficult to do, just because I think of social media and what our world celebrates. But we as coaches have to celebrate other things, and we have to celebrate the stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet or doesn't get recognized. And I think we've built a culture that does that. So if you'd have been in our locker room after the game, we didn't first talk about Javen's 30 points or Cademan Bontrager, who came off the bench at 22. We talked about some of the bench guys who were just cheering for their teammates and really lifting that up and saying, this is what we value. Because at the end of the day, when the ball stops dropping, you need to be that type of encourager. You need to be that type of person who's constantly building into others. If you do that, you're going to have a successful marriage.
Yep.
You're going to be incredible gift to your community. Your church is going to succeed. So we also take a bigger view. Like I tell guys all the time, we're not just concerned about your 4 years, but what do the next 40 look like? And so when you begin to celebrate the things that matter for the next 40, guys will begin to do them more, and you can build a culture around that.
Explain to everybody who doesn't know, and you talked about this 5 years ago, but I don't care because I think it's the greatest model. I even included it in my book. It just impressed me so much. You're wearing the shirt. I am third. Explain what that motto is and kind of where it started and where it transpired.
Yeah, so I am third simply stands for God first, others second, self third. And I got it from Kennecott Christian Ministries. I had just got done playing, and I end up at this camp for a summer, and I'm just blown away by the culture. I'm blown away by just the Christ-centeredness, but also the athletic competition. And I remember saying, if I ever get a head job, this is the type of culture I want, because most of the cultures I had been involved with were very me-centered. And that's the society that we're in, and that's what people think. They think if I'm to have success, I got to look out for myself. I got to take care of myself. I got to look inward. But the Bible demands the opposite, right? Christ over and over said, look, if you want to be first, you have to actually be servant. If you want to be greatest, you have to be least. And he sets the stage for this, what I would say is an upside down mentality. It's the world flipped upside down. And a lot of times we think, well, and if I do that, I don't know what's going to happen to me. But it's another step in the surrender that we're all called to live into. So we've tried to take I am third and say, what does I am third look like in a basketball program? And what we say is, if you want to be first find a way to be third. And you'd say, well, that's not going to help you win. Well, I would say it's been the backbone of our success over the years. When you get a group of guys, in our case, it's 15 guys in a locker room that buy into that and put God first and other people second, the sky's the limit for the potential that you can reach as a team.
Wow. I love that. And this year I've been seeing something that says both and, which is sort of maybe a secondary motto underneath I am third. Can you explain to everybody what that is?
Yeah, that's the motto of the athletic department. And I think what we're seeing happen and what we're trying to let our athletes know is that we want to be unashamedly going after what we call the both and, meaning we want to have success on the court, we want to have success on the field, and we want to be excellent in our sport. But we also want to integrate faith, and we want Christ to be the center of it all. You know, for instance, when I was coming out of high school, I kind of thought I had to choose between those two. I thought, well, I can go play basketball at a high level, but I'm probably going to compromise my faith and the opportunity to grow. Or I could just choose a nice Christian school and grow in my faith, but I'm going to miss out on that basketball. And the vision that I've had for Indiana Wesleyan when I got the job is, why can't we be both? You know, and I told somebody one time, why can't we be the Duke of Christian college basketball? Meaning, when you think of Duke, you just think of excellence, right? Yeah. You think of a standard. Why can't we be the standard for both discipleship, putting Christ first, but also basketball success? And we want to continue to aim towards that vision. When
you are going into a living room with a recruit and talking to mom or dad or whoever might be there, what are you telling them about Indiana Wesleyan and about the program?
Well, I think just that. I mean, I'm telling them, like, I believe that you would reach your potential here at Indiana Wesleyan, and I really believe that, because one of our core beliefs is that a person's maximum potential lies in their spiritual development. And what I mean by that is, if you want to reach your full potential, both on the court and off the court, it's going to happen if you start with discipleship. And so this is a place that's going to integrate discipleship. It's not an add-on. It's not a, hey, we'll do our basketball thing, and then afterwards, you know, we'll have a nice little Bible study. It's like, we want to infuse Christ into everything. We want him to impact every area of your life. And I just look at my own life. Like, if I want to become a better husband, I become a better husband because I become more like Christ. I think it's the same thing for a basketball player. If I want to become a better basketball player, I become more like Christ. But to do that, you need, one, people above you pouring into you, but then you need people around you pouring into you. You need teammates, and you need accountability. And when you have a culture like that and you're immersed into that culture, you can't help but just grow.
And then you talk to these parents, and they recognize, I mean, the parents aren't making a decision. Ultimately, it's the player that's making the decision. But I'm sure not everybody is a fit for that, right? I mean, you want to recruit the best players, obviously, too. Those guys that were playing last night that I was watching, those are good basketball players. They know what they're doing. They're not just guys that, you know, are like nice guys who follow Jesus that maybe, you know, played high school ball and that's it. Like, these are really good players that are helping their team win. But not everybody's a fit in that motto, is it? Are they?
That's the tough part about, you know, our situation is I've had to say no to both. There's been some really good kids who weren't good enough basketball players, and that's a tough no.
Yeah.
But then I've had to say no to some really good basketball players, but they're not great fits. But I think part of my job as a leader is to protect the culture. And that doesn't mean, and I'm very clear in my expectations, like there's not a box you have to fit in to come here. Like there's not a in or out, but what it's more of a line is what we say. And all we care is that there's two things. One, you're honest about where you're at on the line. And even more important than that, you're willing to move forward. So you could come to me and say, hey, coach, like I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I don't know anything about that, but man, I'm curious. Man, you're a perfect fit for us, right? I don't care where you're at, but if you're curious, that tells me you're willing to move forward. And those are the guys that really grow over the 4 years.
That's awesome. What'd you do this summer with your team? Where'd you go?
We get together in June and just spend a lot of time working out, playing, running camps, being very relational with that. Every other year, we go to the Dominican Republic on a mission trip. And this was not the summer, but we will be returning in August of 2024. And I just cannot wait for that trip. You talk about putting I Am Third into action. You know, you go into one of the poorest places that you could visit. You just sacrifice all week long. You shut down from the American life. I mean, your phones go away. It's funny how when your phones go away, how often the worries go away. You know, I'm not worried about finances, and I'm less worried about my record. I'm just immersed in a God first, others second environment. And what I hear from our players is that was the best week of my life.
Wow.
And I can't wait to get back down there. It really is a transformative opportunity.
That's got to be so hard. And go back 19 years, there was no social media. The phones were flip phones, and, you know, they didn't have these things that they were staring at, these mini computers in their pocket every single day. Those are obviously, they can be used for good and they can be used for evil, just like anything else. How have you been able to manage that and keep their focus on God first, you know, their teammates second, and then themselves third, and yet still embrace sort of this new world of TikTok and Instagram and social media?
I mean, I believe, though, you can't take somebody to a place you haven't gone yourself. So there's I think, responsibility on my part to model that. If I'm living on my phone and I'm scrolling all the time, then, you know, I have no right to talk to these guys. But at the same time, we've got what we call a habit. It's a program habit: no Bible, no breakfast. And what we say is, you're not allowed to eat anything in the morning until you get in the Word. You want to eat the Word. And so we often start workouts and practices with, we say, hey, no Bible, no breakfast. What'd you eat? And what you hear is guys will say, hey, I was in, you know, this verse this morning, or I was in this book in this chapter. And it becomes contagious after a while. And what we're seeing is it's just a habit. I mean, we're creatures of habit. A lot of us get up, we check our email, we check our phone, we check our messages. But instead, if God's Word is the first thing we're seeing, you know, what does that do for our day? What does that do for our perspective? And how does that affect our hearts? And it's really snowballed and become just a significant part of our program. And so I love what's happening.
How do you stay fed spiritually? Because you're a coach that's constantly, and I think I might have asked you this 5 years ago, but I love asking it pretty much to every coach I talk to, because so much of what you're doing is pouring into others and giving to others and, you know, emptying your tank, whether it's spiritually or as a basketball coach. So how does the tank stay filled up for Coach Tonagel?
For me, I'm an outdoorsman. I love hunting. I love fishing, and learning how to Sabbath. You know, that's hard for a coach to do, but it's a biblical command for a reason. And I wasn't always good at this as a young coach. So now being able to say, what fills me up? Because, you know, the Sabbath isn't the absence of doing anything. It's doing something that draws you closer to the Lord in a way that fills you up with rest. And so for me, once we get into season, if I can get away on a Sunday and, you know, deer hunt or go fishing with my kids, it fills me up and gets me going for the week.
It's very Chick-fil-A-ish. Kind of close it out on Sunday. Nothing else. You don't practice? Do you practice on Sundays?
No, we
practices
do not.
On Sundays? Yeah. That's good. That's really good. He is Greg Tonagel from Indiana Wesleyan. Where do you think the Lord wants you to go and take you? I mean, we're always talked about bloom where you're planted, focusing on the moment, staying present. But do you ever think about 5, 10, 15 years? I mean, just the fact that you get 500 wins and you start reflecting, do you ever think about where the Lord might be taking you down the road?
I probably too often think about that. Sometimes I'm very future oriented, so I'm there a lot. And lately, I've been asking God to really paint this picture for me. You know, I don't know if you went through this, but when I hit 40, you know, they talk about this midlife crisis.
Oh yeah, I did.
It's real in the way it impacted me was I just began to say, like, well, what am I going to do with my life? And what's next? And you just begin to ask all kinds of crazy questions. Most of them are irrational, but it did force me to say, okay, God, here's what you've done in the previous 19. What is next? What's the vision that's bigger than me that only you could pull off, but yet you're going to call me into? And it's God's forming that. It's I Am Third going to more places, more programs, more cultural corners. There's a vision on an arena that God's laid on my heart for a long, long time, and God's going to have to show up to get it done. But He's starting to make it more clear. But that excites me. And the thing about God is, He doesn't lay it all out. No. If he did, where's the faith? Right. But He's slowly revealing it to me, and that's the fun for me. Is as I surrender and ask for it, He's slowly, bit by bit, laying that out for me.
Well, it's the word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. It's literally just having the light for the next step to get to where we got to go. That's the hard part, because I'm like you. I want to know what I'm doing 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. And that's what makes it tough. Do you think you'll be coaching at like 65 or 70? You think you'll be one of those old guys? There's Coach Tonagel in his 60th year at Indiana Wesleyan.
I hope not. I'm sure one of my kids is going to want to get into coaching, and it would be a dream to be a volunteer on the bench and get behind them in a way that would be fun. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but and then just having 6 kids and wanting to spend time with them and being an outdoorsman, because coaching is demanding. I mean, as we've talked about, there's a lot of sleepless nights. You're on the clock 24 hours a day. But at the same time, like, retirement scares me to death because I can't not do anything.
Yeah.
So I try not to get too far ahead of myself in that, but we'll see.
Well, I tell you what I think I'm most impressed about in talking to you was that you had a game last night and your voice sounds pretty good. Because I thought, we're going to be talking to Coach Tonagel the day after he's coaching, or the morning after he's coaching a game the night before, and that voice is going to sound raspy. So you sound pretty good, Coach.
Well, we were hitting shots last night. When you're up big like that, it helps. It really helps.
A lot less yelling, a lot less screaming. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate you coming back on the show, and I love, obviously, I call myself now, Coach, an investor of Indiana Wesleyan, since meeting you and meeting so many wonderful people here actually paved a path for my daughter to want to go to college here now. So it's been a fun relationship. I know it's going to continue, and thanks for being back on the show. Yeah,
I mean, I should mention this. I've been a fan of Sports Spectrum for a long, long time. So to come full circle and have me on the show means everything to me.
That's cool. Yeah, well, got to keep getting you in the magazine and make sure you get it to those kids, those 6 kids that you have.
Absolutely.
You got it. Thanks, Coach.